What an honor it is to welcome Honorable Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar for a very, very special program that's brought together by Pune International Center and Symbiosis International University on book release and book discussion on the book, The India Way, Strategies for an Uncertain World. To begin with, may I request Dr. Vidya Ayurvedekar, Pro-Chancellor SIU and founding member of PIC, to give her welcome remarks. Dr. Vidya.
Thank you, Prashant. Honorable Dr. Jaishankar sir, Honorable Dr. Mashelkar sir, Dr. Vijay Kelkar, Dr. S.B. Muzumdar sir, the Chancellor of Symbiosis International University, our Vice Chancellor Dr. Rajni Gupte, Dr. Gautam Bambawale, who is a distinguished professor at Symbiosis International University, and the audience of PIC, as well as thousands of students of Symbiosis and academia from Symbiosis who are watching and listening to this event. So we are indeed very thankful to you for accepting the invitation of PIC and Symbiosis. In fact, there are too many common things between PIC and Symbiosis. It's like almost two sides of the same coin, whether it's Dr. Mashelkar sir being one of our advisors, or Gautam Bambawale, or Prashant, and Dr. Vijay Kelkar, and all of us, Dr. Muzumdar sir being on the other side also as a trustee of PIC. We've had several events together. Fortunately, both of us invited you and you have accepted, sir, so it's really nice. It will be a treat for our students, especially the students of the Symbiosis Institute of International Studies, to listen to you. They do the MA in International Relations program. Sir, with Symbiosis, MEA and Symbiosis have been working together for several years now with the International Relations Conference, which is an annual event held here in Pune. So we brought the discussions of IR out of Delhi and in the western region in Pune. So it's also very appreciated by people in Pune, both corporates and academia. So I won't take much time, and thank you very much, sir, for accepting the invitation of PIC and Symbiosis.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vidya Ayurvedekar, Pro-Chancellor of SIU and founding member of PIC. May I now request Dr. S.B. Muzumdar sir, Trustee of Pune International Center and Chancellor of Symbiosis International University, to please give his opening remarks. Sir.
Thank you, Prashant. Honorable Dr. Jaishankar ji, Dr. Mashelkar, Dr. Kelkar, Ambassador Dr. Bambawale, Dr. Vidya, Dr. Gupte, and my students who are viewing this event. Sir, on behalf of Symbiosis International University, I extend a very hearty welcome. Symbiosis was established in 1971 to promote friendship and brotherhood between foreign and Indian students. I was then professor of botany at Ferguson College, and I realized the problems and difficulties faced by foreign students studying in Pune. There are many problems such as admission, accommodation, social problems, and so on. So we thought that why not start a small organization called Symbiosis to promote friendship between foreign and Indian students. Initially we used to organize cultural and religious get-togethers between foreign and Indian students, because I found that there was no dialogue between foreign and Indian students then. And then that is how we started a small organization for the welfare of foreign students. Little later, we started many educational institutions. So we thought that if we start educational institutions, foreign students and Indian students will come together. They will attend the classes together, they will play together on playground, read together in the library, and they will develop a friendship which will ultimately lead to international understanding. So it was in 1993 that we started a very unique institution, Symbiosis Institute of Management Studies. It was exclusively for the dependents of defense personnel, Army, Navy, and Air Force. 90% students are admitted from defense background, and only 10% students are those who are industry sponsored. It so happened that in 2005, we decided to start annual lecture series in the name of Field Marshal Manekshaw. And as the luck would have it, I contacted your father, K. Subramaniam, and he agreed to inaugurate this particular lecture series. I remember K. Subramaniam delivered his lecture, inaugural lecture, on 15 July 2005 on the subject Indo-US relations in coming decades. So there is some connection between your father and Symbiosis, and therefore I'm glad to receive you on behalf of Symbiosis International University. Sir, I'm reading your book with great interest, and especially I like your chapter on Krishna's choice. Permit me to read only few sentences. You have mentioned in your book about the Krishna, and you said the Krishna, more momentous of them is that Sri Krishna, who provides strategic guidance, diplomatic energy, and tactical wisdom in navigating challenges. I really enjoyed this particular chapter, and I was very happy that you have described many incidences in America, in the Mahabharata, and connected it to present situation in our country. Sir, I don't want to take much of your time. I am reminded of your father who delivered that lecture, and that lecture was published in Indian Express and also it was published in different journals. I hope one day you will find time to visit Symbiosis to deliver lecture. Thank you so much, sir, for accepting our invitation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Muzumdar, sir. International Center and Chancellor. International Center. Now we come to the core of the program on book discussion. On the book, The India Strategies for an Uncertain World by Dr. S. Jaishankar. May I request Ambassador Gautam Bambawale, who serves as trustee at Pune International Center and is a distinguished professor at SIU, to please initiate the discussion and take it forward, looking forward. Ambassador Bambawale.
Thank you very much, Prashant. Yeah, I think, can you hear me? Thank you very much, Prashant, and Minister Jaishankar. A warm welcome from both people in the Pune International Center as well as the Symbiosis International University. As Dr. Vidya mentioned, there's a great overlap between the two institutions, and you know that yourself, as you know us all very well. Could I start with a question which was sparked by what Dr. Mazumdar just said about your late father, Dr. K. Subramaniam? I see that you dedicate your book to K. Subramaniam, father, and Arvind R. Dev, mentor. Now, your late father, of course, is very well known in all corners of India, including here in Pune. But Ambassador Arvind Dev is also well known here in Pune because his roots are here. So could I request you to talk a little bit about how both of them influenced your thinking, your development as an individual, and perhaps your outlook on both India and the world?
Well, thank you, Gautam. Very good to see you. And let me thank Dr. Majumdar for his welcome, for his very warm words. And it's again wonderful to see Dr. Kelkar and Dr. Mashelkar, again, two eminent people with whom I've had the privilege of working. And I must say, I remembered the fact that my father had come to Symbiosis for that lecture. Because I have another connection with Symbiosis. One of my nephews actually studied there. And I think if my memory serves me right, probably was there when my father came to deliver the lecture. But anyway, it's good to be with you people virtually. So let me, Gautam, start with your question. Yes, when I thought about the dedication, and this came to me sort of very naturally, part of it was when you have a father who, in many senses, is also a teacher, because you discuss things at home, even sitting in the breakfast table and talking about what is in the news, or the dinner table and listening to the 9 o'clock All India Radio, which is what my generation used to do. You learn a lot of things almost unconsciously. And then if your line of work happens to be similar, because he, of course, was much more involved in the defense, national security, and because of that, foreign policy, and then it tends to sort of be bigger than just a father-son relationship. And I would say one of the complaints I used to get at home was, even when I was living abroad, which I did for most, of my working life, I would come home and other family members would complain, saying, well, you disposed of all of us in 5 minutes, and there the two of you are discussing, professional stuff, foreign policy stuff. So it was that way a very, very close relationship. Now, where Ambassador Arvind was concerned, it was, of course, something very different. In a way, something somewhat similar. I entered the foreign ministry, all of 22 years old, having, done education in political science and international relations. Very cocksure, probably thought I knew more than I did. Very opinionated. That has actually gone down over the years. What happens when you enter as a trainee, as a probationer, as we used to call those days, you would be attached to somebody. Now, 50% of the time, those days, it used to work out reasonably well. Whoever you're attached to, mentored you, took care of you, connected you, in a sense, to what was the system. Now, I still remember my first encounter, which was, he quizzed me. He said, it isn't often that we get somebody who's done international relations before you come in. So then he asked me, he said, so, tell me, what is the book, in your view, what is a book which will stand you in good stead when you become a diplomat? So, I sort of had to think of a smart, knowledgeable answer. So I said, well, maybe Hans Morgenthau. Then he said, no, but you're a diplomat now. So I said, oh, yes, we do. There's in international relations, there was like a primer on diplomacy by a person called Harold Nicholson. So we went up and down. Then he said, I'll give you a very interesting book, which I'm sure you've read, but I'm not sure you've read it as a from the point of view of diplomacy. So I was like, okay. And then he produced a book of Mario Puzo's Godfather. I said, just think this one through. He always makes reasonable offers. He knows when to keep his mouth shut, when to say what he does, speaks very, very sparingly. One of his complaints about his elder son is actually he shows his feelings too openly. Be measured, be calibrated. And I must say, having, this Godfather was the great movie, great book of my student days. I never thought of it like that. Now, I'm saying this to you as someone who could take something else, what for all of us was literature, amusement, entertainment, and bring it into your professional life. Now, he helped me in the earlier years. I had I struggled. I finished my PhD thesis, but I ran into a bureaucratic wall. I didn't know when you joined the government, somebody said, well, we need to look at your thesis before we allow you to submit it. Now, that upset me, because I felt, listen, I'm sure nobody in bureaucracy can sit and judge me when I'm coming out of 4 or 5 years of research on a subject. Now, he spoke to the foreign secretary of the day, got it clear. And, I went to Russia for my first posting. He was Soviet Union those days. He was the department, the division head. But when I look back, I think the biggest thing he did for me in that years I spent with him was, as Gautam told us, he was from Pune. Okay. He made me understand that I was what in today's parlance called a Lutyens person. I'd grown up in Delhi. My mindset was Delhi. Everything which, that ecosystem had instilled in you, I had absorbed. And then he made me understand, look, when you look at India from a different vantage point, it's very different. India is not Delhi. That there are different perspectives of India. If you're more, in a sense, rooted to the ground, or you have a sort of a different perspective. And I still remember very early on, once we had a long discussion about Shivaji, Chhatrapati Shivaji. Now, when you look at Chhatrapati Shivaji from a sort of a Pune perspective, or from I would say, a Western perspective, or I would say from a non-Delhi perspective, it's a very, very different sort of view, and a very sort of bigger salience in a sense that he has in our history. So I credit him in many ways with sort of opening my mind beyond where I came from, setting me off on my professional career. For many years, whenever I needed advice, he was my go-to person. It's a long answer, but there is, there was a very important reason why, therefore, he figured it.
That is very interesting. That is very interesting, Ambassador Jaishankar. And let me say that by through those words, you have won a whole lot of admirers in this part of India, definitely in Pune. And I'm sure the book will sell even better here than it has been doing so far. But there's obviously another book, or maybe let's call it an Indian epic, the Mahabharata, which has played a very important role in your thinking. As Dr. Majumdar rightly said, one of the most interesting and riveting chapters in your book is titled Krishna's Choice, where you basically draw a parallel between that great Indian epic, the Mahabharata, and today's India, the strategic choices that India faces today. And in fact, you say that being an ethical power is one aspect of India way. So obviously, you do not see a contradiction between being ethical on the one hand and being powerful on the other. Could I request you to please elaborate on this chapter, your views on the important points of this chapter?
Well, again, growing up in a household where people generally gave you, books for duty, books for pleasure, books, where books was a very important part of our upbringing. And it wasn't just my father, my grandparents, my cousins, aunts, uncles, we were all. And I cannot remember when I would have first read the Mahabharata, but it would have been well before I was 10. Okay. And it was something which was very deeply engrossing. And the more times you read it in a very interesting way, the more meanings you found in it. By the time I hit, let us say, my 20s, working career, etc., it sort of, again, there was not a single moment. It was a gradual realization that actually what I was looking at was a superb narrative of, call it politics, call it statecraft, or diplomacy, in a sense, international relations, though it was all part of Bharat. But I think very unconsciously, I related it to my education and my skills, my profession in foreign policy and diplomacy. And if you actually step back and look at it, pretty much everything which is taught to anybody, and I'm sure all your students in international relations who are listening to me today, what do they teach you? They teach you, a fundamental is balance of power. Mahabharata is a balance of power story. But if you look at the heart of the, the final outcome, you have the Kuru kingdom and Hastinapur. Okay, who are its immediate neighbors? Okay, the immediate neighbors are Matsya, King Virat. You have Drupad. You have Dwarka, which is the neighbor. What do the neighbors do? The neighbors try and balance you off. The neighbors develop relationships among themselves. And when they see the Hastinapur kingdom bifurcate, they immediately, try to build relations with one of the parties, because again, that's their balance of power that they are constructing. Or, if you look at the diplomatic challenges, coalition building, who's reliable, who will fight with you till the end, who's not so reliable, what is the cost of an unreliable partner? How do you actually create diversions? Now, pretty much everything that you practice in the Mahabharata is actually out there. Now, the story of this particular chapter is a very interesting one, because again, it goes to one of my senior colleagues and mentors. This is a gentleman Gautam knows well, called Mr. Rasgotra. He was the foreign secretary in the early 80s. In fact, just this afternoon, I had met him. He's all of 96 and going strong. Now, Mr. Rasgotra heads the Sai Foundation. So one day after we retired, he was talking to me, and somehow the subject of epics, our own traditions, international relations, this came up. He said, "Look, instead of talking to me, why don't you go out there and give this talk? A lot of people will connect, because you are they keep this in different compartments, as though epics are some kind of novel, or and this is serious stuff, and that isn't. Whereas you actually brought them together. And it also struck me in the process that every other culture, and I mention it in that chapter, they actually not just take analogies, metaphors, situations from their epics. All of us would use the word Trojan horse from the Iliad. Okay. Now, my point was, why don't we look at our own epics in the same way which others look at, their heritage and their tradition. So I spoke, I think this would have been maybe about a year and a half ago, on this subject of the Sai Foundation. It was not as clean as the text that I finally developed. And interestingly, the other person with whom I've had this discussion was actually, when I was foreign secretary, my minister, Sushma Swaraj. So I would say pretty much one of the final drafts of this, I had actually shown her. And she told me one day, and this was one of our last conversations, she said, you must get this published. It's something which will interest a lot of people. So for me, in a sense, I want people to understand you don't have to look outside for wisdom. I'm not against outside wisdom. I say you should also look outside for wisdom. But there's a lot in our own country, in our own tradition, in our own heritage that we need to look at. Part of it, in a sense, when we say Atmanirbhar Bharat, is an intellectual Atmanirbharta. But part of it is also that, look, this ability to think for ourselves and do what is important for us. And there, Gautam, you raised this issue, ethics. It's not, if you look at the Western tradition or the Chinese tradition, Gautam, which you know better than I do, you don't have that reconciliation so easily. It is often a dilemma between power and ethics. Whereas I think the beauty of Indian statecraft and Indian tradition, and Mahabharata is a very good example, is actually how you sort of harmonize them. And that's important today for people to know, because as we go up in the world, as we do more things, we are capable of more things, as we get involved in more decisions, I think it's very important to develop our own persona, our own brand, our own perspective. And given our history and our tradition, it's a very important element of that, in my view, is to be an ethical power. And in a sense, I would say be a force of good. And it's, I don't take it as empty words. I'm giving you very practical examples of this. Say today, if you look at the entire Indian Ocean region, from Fiji to East Africa, look at the last 5 years. Every time there's been a major disaster, natural disaster, man-made disaster, civil war in Yemen, cyclone in Mozambique, Nepal earthquake, mudslides in Sri Lanka, cyclone in Myanmar, in Fiji. We have gone in today as a responder because we have more capacity and people look up to us, saying, as a more capable neighbor who will do something. So this ability to step up and assume global responsibilities, do good, I think is a very important part of our rise. The other, I would say again, is even our Africa partnership. I would say again, I'm giving you both the ethics and the power calculation. For India, the rise, facilitating, contributing, partnering the rise of Africa is in our strategic interest. If Africa becomes one of the poles of the global polity, it is better for us. Here's the ethics of it. We are comrades. We have this deep solidarity which came out of the anti-colonial movement. So and there is a sort of moral obligation of that shared struggle. So in a sense, we are doing the right thing, but we are doing the smart thing. And that right and smart, how do you combine it? That's really what this is about.
Thank you so much. Could I ask you, Mr. Minister, that, the title of your book, of course, the subtitle is Strategies for an Uncertain World. And we have seen that uncertain world in this year of 2020, not merely through the pandemic, but also through what the Chinese military and the Chinese authorities are doing on our borders in Ladakh. Could I request you to interpret what is the state of the world? How do you see the world in geopolitical terms going forward from here for ordinary lay persons who may not be students of international relations, but who have a great interest in these aspects of India's policy?
Well, Gautam, I would say, part of the reason I wrote the book, because there were, some of them were disconnected lectures, some of them were not. A lot of it I wrote for the book itself, was actually a growing sense that the world which we live in is very, very different with each passing day from the world we grew up in. Obviously, someone older like me would say this with more force and conviction. Even someone younger, someone who's 25 years old today, would still feel this very strong. Now, there are two problems here. One, we're all set in our ways. Okay, it's a very human trait that we have certain beliefs. This is what the world looks like. This is where America is. This is where China is. This is how our relations are going to be. This is how it was 5 years ago. So this is how it will be 5 years from. So it's a kind of a habit formed response to the world. The second part of it is where changes occur. And I've concentrated on 3-4 of those. Say the 2016 election outcome and in America and President Trump coming into office, or the Brexit vote in UK, or the rise of China, which is a process, but still a very, very impactful process. What happens is we tend to treat it as a sort of one-off. Okay, we don't always see that these are all, that there's a line connecting these dots, that the impact of these events also creates a kind of a new reality, if you will. So I would say, if you ask me today, explain the world to people, my first explanation would be a world which originally, 1945, had two superpowers, and their blocks. Then as prosperity came, Europe recovered from the war, Japan recovered from the war, in decolon, you kind of had a sort of a further evolution of that. The Soviet Union collapsed. Dominance of America was greater for some years. That changed things. But the turning point for the world we have entered, to my mind, was 2008, which was with the global financial crisis and the rise of China, India, China most of all, India to a large extent, other regions, ASEAN, for example. You entered a world of visible economic rebalancing, where it was the big issues of the day could not be decided by 2 countries or 5 countries or 7 countries, but now by a much larger set of players, often decided regionally as well. And I think the process which started in 2008, 2009 has taken even sharper turn this year with the changes due to the coronavirus pandemic. So they've sort of accelerated a lot of those trend lines. So I would say today the big shift is towards a multipolar world where many more poles, obviously the poles are not of equal size, are necessary. So it's like doing an arithmetic, with what is from addition to multiplication to calculus. I mean, it keeps getting more and more complicated in a way. So that's why there's so many more variables that I argue it's going to be a very uncertain one. Many of the variables are still developing, so the weight of each factor is not the weight it used to be. America is not the America of 5 years ago. China is not the China of 5 years ago. For that matter, India is not the India of 5 years ago. So in every region, you'll get a new combination of factors, of forces which interact each other. And in that, today, the question you asked me about China, you have a situation where China is obviously visibly rising for the last many, many years. India has been growing. China is the number 2 economy. We are probably in absolute nominal terms, maybe number 5, number 6. But it's very clear that it's a matter of time before we'll be the number 3 economy. So, and we happen to be neighbors. We are civilizational states who are once again assuming a bigger role in the world. So how to me, the big question is really how do 2 such countries, both of whom are rising. So it's like a dynamic situation. It's not like one static and one rising. How do they find an equilibrium? That's the basic case I've addressed in the chapter. Now, the situation that you spoke about, that's something, when I really wrote up this chapter, that had not happened. I had pretty much finished the manuscript of this book around April or so. The challenge here for us is that with China, we have, sort of sought to normalize what was a very difficult relationship. You've been very much part of that normalization process, Gautam, as I have in my own way. And that, normalization, which really meant trade, travel, tourism, businesses, sort of any kind of societal activity, that developed from the late 80s on the premise that there will be peace and tranquility in the border areas. I mean, again, I want to be very, very clear on this point, Gautam. It's not our position that we should solve the boundary dispute, or the boundary question. We understand that's a very complicated, very difficult issue. There have been many negotiations on this at different levels over a different period. That's a very high bar for a relationship. I'm talking of a much more basic bar, which is there must be peace and tranquility along the line of actual control in the border areas. And that has been the case since the late 80s. Now, if peace and tranquility is deeply disturbed, then obviously there will be an impact on the relationship. And I think that is really what we are seeing this.
Minister Jaishankar, isn't the real challenge which is posed to India by the rise of China one of being able to produce and manufacture goods and services as efficiently or nearly as efficiently and productively as China itself? In other words, shouldn't India be growing at a faster GDP growth rate so that the asymmetry with China economically, militarily, and otherwise is reduced? And in this context, can you also speak a little bit to the current policy of Atmanirbharta or Atmanirbhar Bharat? Will that help to reduce the asymmetry between India and China?
I Gautam, very frankly, wouldn't put it the way you put it. I don't see it the way you see it. To me, I would definitely like to see India grow much faster, develop more capabilities. But I don't think it's because we are competing with China or, I think we have to do it for ourselves. I mean, in a sense, we are competing against everybody in the world. Even it's a world where every major player is competing against every other country, even friendly countries, when it comes to economic capabilities. Now, when it comes to China, I would make 2 points and then I'll come to the core of your question. I feel that there are lessons we can learn from China, okay, from the way China has grown. But at the same time, let's be very clear, we're not China. When people suggest that, you fixed it, they did this, you did this, I mean, our sociology is different, our politics is different, the nature of our governance is very different. So I again, at various points of time, it's an issue I have addressed in the book, which is how do you learn from the experiences of a dissimilar power? Because even with dissimilar, there are lessons to be learned. Now, coming to your issue, should we be growing faster? My answer to you is a yes. But if you look at the last 20, 25 years, what has happened? We've grown fast. Okay, no question. But we must ask ourselves, was that really the kind of long-term balanced growth, sustainable growth that we wanted? What we actually have seen in this last 25 years, well, there are many, many good points, and I know, both Dr. Kelkar and Dr. Mashelkar would be listening to this with great attention. I would also point out to the fact that we tried to find solutions for a lot of our own growth and inefficiency by importing from outside. Okay, so we built up many sectors with imports saying, oh, it's cheap, it's competitive, we will rapidly build up. No problem with the sums out there. Now here's the downside. You didn't generate the support systems, create the employment. Normally when a country grows, industrializes, you actually expand your small and medium scale enterprises. Actually, in our cases, they've been very negatively impacted. So I think we need to relook, and it's very important for a country to be open-minded about its own record. We need to relook at the last 20, 25 years and say, okay, which parts of it have we got right? Which we have. We have got many parts right. And which parts of it could we have got different? And I feel that a big part of what we could have done differently and should now be doing differently is actually to strengthen our industrial base. We talk about innovation. Innovation in this country will not happen if you're not prepared to support the application of that innovation. So you have to support the manufacturing sector. The idea that somehow services is going to solve our problem is a fantasy. So, and the other, the corollary of that is we haven't got the employment numbers which should be coming from that growth rate. So we're not doing employment-centric growth. So I would say, to my mind, the trade arrangements and the manufacturing strategy needs to be adjusted. The employment centrality of that needs to be looked at. And the third point, if you look at our reforms, if you talk typically of reforms, what's in our mind? Okay, reforms is financial. Okay, reforms is physical assets. We've improved our telecom. That's a reform. Power reform, telecom reform. We haven't applied ourselves to the deep-seated, I would say, socio-economic reform, the human development reform that we should have done. The kind of programs, say, we have seen in the last 5 years. If you look at Beti Padhao, Beti Bachao, okay, what is the consequence of that? You will have more girls in schools. You will eventually end up with a much more skilled, much larger workforce because you have brought, a lot of people who are missing out on education and thereafter skills and eventually workplace in that system. So my point is, if you don't address very basic human development indices reforms, if you don't look at health delivery, you don't look at housing, you don't look at and mass housing, you don't look at education, you don't look at skills. I mean, we produce people, but they're not employable. That is the difference between us and East Asia, Southeast Asia. This is where they have scored over us. You have lived in East Asia, I've lived in Southeast Asia as well. You look at a China, but I would say look more even at a Japan. I mean, the original model of this kind of change. I mean, when you speak of Atmanirbharta, that kind of thinking actually came in Japan 150 years ago, where people said, look, let's go out, see what's good in the world, but at the end of the day, we have to bring it back home, we have to absorb it, we have to develop our variants of it, and we have to develop that ability to compete. And that's, to my mind, what we have lacked, and I'm very, very glad today that this is today the core direction of the government policy. And I think if we can make Atmanirbharta a mindset of people, that we all have not just confidence, capability, but a certain pride in our own activities and product. I think this country is capable of doing great things. I've seen this even during the Corona time, where when the pandemic hit us, we had no PPEs, we had hardly any masks, no ventilators, no testing. We produced it. I mean, 6 months this country has risen to the Corona challenge. So we are capable of things where we have leadership and motivation. And I do believe that that's something which
Mr. Minister, we are coming to the end of the time which you had allocated to us, but I cannot but ask you one last question, which is, where did you find the time to write this book? You have been a cabinet minister for the last year and a half almost. Before that, you were in the private sector. Before that, you were the Foreign Secretary of India. How do you find time to write this book? And could I ask a crass commercial question? I hope the book is doing well commercially.
Well, but time, look, they say those who want to find time will always find time. I felt very strongly about the book. Okay. So I've sat at airports and on travel and, sometimes reading, cutting, editing, sitting in the car, waiting for meetings. So somewhere I felt, for me, it was important I finish this and put it out. And yes, I believe it's doing quite decently. I think we are hoping now to move to a third print. And I think if all the listeners in Pune respond positively, maybe a fourth print very quickly. I don't know.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. And I'll hand back to Prashant Girbane.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Bambawale. What an honor it is to be part of the attendees and audience today, listening to that scintillating interaction between Honorable Minister and yourself. Now, we turn to the concluding remarks. May I request Dr. Vijay Kelkar, Vice President of Pune International Center, to please address us with his concluding remarks. Dr. Kelkar.
Let me first thank our distinguished guest, the Minister for External Affairs, Dr. Jaishankar, for absolutely scintillating remarks and very candid response to Ambassador Bambawale's questions. I was very encouraged by him, by his reference to our own civilizational heritage to look at the problem of today's challenges. Thanks to my wife, Minister, I'm also these days reading a little bit of Jaishankar and Vidyaranya. And I do find even these writings a deep messages for one's everyday life, not just diplomacy. So I'm totally with you that we don't have to always quote the other sources. We have our own very, very strong and deep heritage from which we can draw upon the wisdom. Regarding your remarks on our economic challenges, I also agree with you that we got a lot of things right, but we got a lot of things wrong. And I think time has come to correct ourselves. And hopefully, in the coming years, our strategies will make amends for what we didn't do adequately in our last sort of, still 1990, our first burst of reforms. We didn't do it. Now, this burst, we may have to tackle what one is called second generation of reforms. And as far as your book is concerned, I think it's going to be a spectacularly successful book. And not only Pune will, our members will rush to buy it, but there are lots of people today. I'm told we are probably almost 500 people who had logged in. So you have a very large multiplier effect through this event. So once again, let me thank you for your very, very thoughtful remarks. And before I conclude, I also want to just mention, take this opportunity like Dr. Muzumdar did, pay tribute to your father, because he was really our guru when it comes to thinking, rational thinking on India's challenges. But he, as you said, he saw holistically. He didn't compartmentalize it. And from that, we learn from interaction, formal interaction, informal interaction, and listening to you reminded me of that. That I had the same glimpse of your father's wisdom and scholarship. So once again, I thank you on behalf of Symbiosis International University and behalf of PIC for your agreeing to speak here, and also Ambassador Bambawale for doing skillfully. It's not easy to interview one's own boss, but he did absolutely in a very great style and without sort of anything. So without embarrassing himself or his boss. So Gautam, really outstanding performance. Thank you very much. Back to Prashant.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kelkar. All that's left in the program is for me to say, on behalf of all the attendees on this channel, as well as multiple other channels like YouTube and others, where we are lively broadcasting this program. Thank you so much, Honorable Minister, sir. Thank you, Dr. Muzumdar, sir. Thank you so much, Dr. Mashalkar, Dr. Kelkar, sir, the Vice Chancellor, Dr. Gupte, Pro-Chancellor, Dr. Perwadekar, Faculty of Symbiosis, young and bright students of Symbiosis, trustees and members of PIC, and many, many others who attended the program. Many thanks once again. With a huge thanks to Honorable Minister, I declare that we conclude the program. Thank you so much.